One, the full picture of devastation from the flooding of Hurricane Helene in eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina just beginning to come into focus. We check in on the ground with the Mayor of Knox County, WWE Hall of Famer, also known as Kane. Mayor Glenn Jacobs joins us today on the Will Cain Show. Two, a mini rabbit hole, the Carrington effect. J.D. Vance's dial testing, and MSNBC loses control when a guest they thought would be all about January 6th is instead all about Donald Trump. Three, across the country with David Marcus. It's the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel, and the Fox News Facebook page. Always on demand. Just hit subscribe on YouTube. Find the Will Cain Show on Facebook. If you're watching on the Fox News Facebook page or the Fox News YouTube page, you can jump into the comments section, but you can also become a member of our community by just jumping over to one of those two home pages for the Will Cain Show and hitting subscribe. If you're listening to us on terrestrial radio in north of a dozen markets across the country, you can catch us whenever you like by subscribing on Apple or on Spotify. I socialized last night. I hung out with a lot of people who, based upon geography, based upon the place that I live, were incredibly impressed with J.D. Vance, but were independent voters. Yesterday, we debated that question with Rachel Campos Duffy, Sean Duffy, and Charlie Hurt. Today, we have some dial testing that shows how independents felt about Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. And when you're socializing, you often talk about the future. And one of the big takeaways, one of the big impressions of J.D. Vance was he might have a future, like a real future, like 2028. But whether or not it's J.D. Vance, maybe Glenn Youngkin, maybe we should give more attention to somebody that's in the Will Cain Show Fantasy Football League. Maybe we should just give a little more attention and listen to some amazing appearances by Congressman Byron Donalds. That, and I fell into just a mini rabbit hole, only dug about a foot deep, but I have to talk to you about the sun flare that might hit Earth tomorrow and has in the past. Let me introduce you to the Carrington effect. That's all coming up in just a little bit here on the Will Cain Show. But as I mentioned, the full picture of devastation, not just in western North Carolina, but in eastern Tennessee, is coming into focus. I-40 torn out, almost all roads shut down, people having to be backpacked in and out. And of course, that may work for infants or maybe even pets, but it's a hard ask of an elderly person living in the mountains, totally cut off from electricity, water supply, and roads. The deaths, I think, are approaching 150 people. And in some instances, this is being described as a 1 in 5,000 year storm. We're just beginning to understand. And hopefully, I know that we can count on neighbors. I know that we can count on Americans, but can we count on our leaders to put America first? Let's get into that with story number one. The Mayor of Knox County, Tennessee, also, for what it's worth, a WWE Hall of Famer, formerly known as Kane, is Glenn Jacobs. He's joined us in the past here on the Will Cain Show, and I'm honored to have him here today because it's an important moment for eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina. Mayor, thanks for being with us here. Can you give us some sense? Western North Carolina's gotten a ton of attention nationally. Maybe not as much attention on what's happened just over the Smoky Mountains, just over the ridge, where, by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, all the rivers that we're talking about, the French Broad River, the Pigeon River, the Nolichucky River, flow into Tennessee. So all that flood swelling ends up in your state and at least right next door to your county. How are things in eastern Tennessee?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Will, and you're exactly right. One of the big issues for us was the French Broad River. Here in Knox County, we had minimal damage. We just had to close a couple roads. Some folks had some water in their house, but not many. Obviously, if you have property damage, it's a personal tragedy, but we did not see the wide-scale devastation that we saw in Upper East Tennessee. Friday afternoon, just like everyone else, I'm paying attention to the news, and I'm seeing this happen. And in Unicoi County, Tennessee, which is in the upper very corner up by North Carolina, their hospitals flooded. People were on the rooftop. The Tennessee Highway Patrol, as well as our great folks in Knox County Sheriff's Office, were airlifting them off of the rooftop of the hospital. Then a little later, we're about 50 miles from Cott County. That's much closer to us. Unicoi in those counties about an hour and a half up the road. The Waterville Dam near Cott County was compromised. Initially, it was reported it was burst. Thank God that didn't happen. But it was compromised, and there was water flowing around, flowing over it. Had to evacuate downtown Newport, which that never seen that before. And again, the sheriff sent our helicopter up to help airlift people off of rooftops. They saved about 24 folks and their dogs, 4 dogs, I think 24 people and 4 dogs, as well as just in Cott County, there was just devastation. One of the biggest issues is a lack of drinking water, because obviously the groundwater has been contaminated. You have flood water going through sewage treatment plants, so you have raw sewage in the water now there, and then as well as weather toxins that might normally be in the water from industrial sites and those sort of things now in the water. In Cott County, I'm just more familiar with that. I talked with their mayor yesterday. In Cott County, they did get their water plant back on. However, it's probably going to be at least another week before the water's safe to drink, so they're still under a boil order in the more remote parts of the county. And these counties are all pretty rural and pretty poor places. They just don't have a lot of resources. But a lot of people are on wells. The groundwater is contaminated, so the well water is contaminated. The electricity is back on in Cott County, thank goodness. But some of their roads are still out. We sent crews up to help just with emergency repairs on their roads, as well as just organization for the response. Our health, it's things you don't think about too. Our health department is up there helping with inoculations for tetanus and hepatitis. Obviously, because if people are in that water and have open sores or whatever, they're going to get diseases from all the horrible things in the water. So it's a pretty bad situation. However, just the outpouring has been just unbelievable from churches and nonprofits and businesses, just individuals. And my hat's also off to the local government and the state officials who have responded very well and as best they can, in these truly overwhelming circumstances.
Let's talk about that for just a moment, Mayor. So, I almost could hear that in your voice when you began that last point you made about the help that you receive. And I never want to paint myself as an expert, but having dove into what happened in Lahaina, Maui, just over a year ago now, it was my biggest takeaway. It really was. It's like, if you ever really want to understand human nature, or at least the nature of community, go to some place that's been hit really hard by something that was unexpected and that was natural, and you will see the best of man. You will see neighbor for neighbor, community for community. And I'm happy to hear that Knox County hasn't had that much damage. But what you end up becoming, I would assume, is a staging ground. You become a staging ground for help. You become a staging ground for the government, because I know you're 100 and some odd miles from, upper northeast Tennessee, but, an hour from some of the ones that are further south where a lot of this damage is. What I want to ask you then, as you've experienced that humility or seen it, and or that appreciation of human nature, and you are a staging ground, no one wants to throw anybody under the bus. And the blame game and all that, honestly isn't productive, especially in the immediacy of these things. But can you give me a sense, like, who's there for you? Is it neighbors? Is it local governments? Is it state? Is it FEMA? Is it the federal government? Like, how much support, where is it coming from for you in Tennessee?
Well, initially, the response is always from a governmental side. It's always going to be from state and local. Folks think that, and this is nothing against, the people at FEMA. Personally, I'm not a fan of the bureaucracy, but, I'm sure that the boots on the ground people, care very much and are doing the best that they can, but FEMA is not like Superman that puts on his cape and flies in and starts doing all this stuff. Just naturally it takes a while to respond to something like this. And I do think this will end up being bigger than Hurricane Katrina. I think it'll be more expensive. It's just the geographical area is just much larger than what happened during Katrina. But anyway, they're just FEMA is limited because, what happens is there's an initial response from the state and local agencies. And a lot of it is also coordinating with, the nonprofits and people that do this, do this for a living. The churches always step up. When you think about Hurricane Katrina, and not to make it political, but, everyone blamed George Bush and FEMA's response. However, again, that initial response comes from the state and local authorities. We forget that Ray Nagin, who was mayor of New Orleans, he went to jail for corruption. So by the time FEMA got there, it was already out of hand. And I think what's happened here is, it's been, mistakes are going to get made. They just are. But the difference is you have doers here. You have people who are like, we're going. At one point, I was talking about we need to help with some stuff up in Cock County legally, how we do that. And we decided basically it was better to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. So, we got it all done, but we already had people rolling, before we had like the mutual aid contract sign and that sort of stuff. And that's often where people point, I say, you did this. Well, people's lives are at risk here. We have to do something to our neighbors and our friends. It's just, we've gotten help from just all over the country. We're the volunteer state, and it's often in the darkest hour that the volunteer spirit shines most brightly, right?
Yeah.
But it's not just Tennessee. It's come from all over the country and really all over the world.
It is so awesome. And I love how you said it's doers. I mean, I see Congressman Corey Mills. He's very forward-facing on this, but I think he's a good illustration. He's working with Mercury One Charities and doing what they can. And it's just, what it does is it brings out the doers, to your point. On the note of FEMA and the government, I also appreciate what you have to say about it's a hard task. They're not Superman. However, if there is room for criticism, and I'll do this, you don't have to, but it seems to be begging for resources when we're spending so many resources in other places. When you see Americans, then if your excuse is ever, I don't have enough resources to deal with this problem, but you tell Americans I've got this hundreds of $millions going to resettling illegal immigrants through FEMA funds, now you got a problem, okay? Now you got a real problem, and you need to explain to us, help us understand why Americans don't come first. Now I'll wait, and we'll see exactly how this plays out in Tennessee. But I don't know if you want to address that.
Well, I 100% agree. Before we're spending money on other places, we need to take care of our own people first. And it does seem like from Washington, we'd have to be the world's policeman when we have our own problems here at home. We have $35 trillion in debt, and we're shipping military hardware and tens of billions of dollars all across the world. And then Mayorkas is coming out and saying that FEMA doesn't have enough money to get through hurricane season. That is utterly unacceptable.
Utterly unacceptable.
And another issue,
Mayor,
I'm sorry. Well, but just another issue that I found from the federal government is a lack of communication with the Biden administration. When Donald Trump was in the White House, there was constant communication actually with the locals. And I remember in 2019, we had pretty bad flooding in Knox County, and I had been to Washington, been invited for some things, and I'd made a friendship with the then deputy director of intergovernmental affairs. So I'm flying around in the sheriff's helicopter, live streaming the flooding in Knox County. And I get a text, hey man, if you guys need anything, you let me know. We can help you navigate through FEMA, whatever. And this is coming from the White House. That doesn't happen for whatever reason. And maybe it's a Republican Democrat thing. I don't know, but that hasn't been happening under the Biden-Harris administration. At this point, that'd actually be my biggest criticism of them.
So last thing, I want everyone, to the best of our own ability, to understand the context of what we're talking about here. I think last time you and I were together, I told you I lived in Eastern Tennessee for a good 6 months during COVID. And so I got to know the area, not well, but I got to know the area to some extent. So when you talk about the kind of communities up there in those mountains, you are talking about very rural, very poor, sometimes isolated, even with roads and electricity. But now you cut all that off, and you got a real logistical issue in saving these people. And I wanted to, so what I read is that many of these rivers went up 13 feet. That's a lot, right? And then the TVA, through your history, has built dams to help when it comes to flooding prepare for this. So Douglas Lake is one of those big reservoirs prepared to control floodwaters up 22 feet. I don't know if that helps people understand exactly the amount of water we're talking about here, but the biggest thing I saw was a TVA authority figure said, we're not talking about a once-in-a-generation storm. We're not talking about a once-in-a-millennial storm. We're talking about something that is a once-in-5,000-year level of rain and storm here for the Carolinas and Tennessee.
Yeah. I mean, when Mother Nature does this, there's only so much human beings can do. My family's actually from Jefferson County and on Douglas Lake. I've lived there 30 years on and off, and I have never seen it like it is now. They were releasing at one point out of Douglas Dam 75,000 cubic feet of water per second. And the issue is, it wasn't that the dams burst. It was that the water is overflowing, and at some point they actually have to allow the water to go through the dams at a high rate, because if they don't, then the dam does burst. And then what we saw would be exponentially worse, because we would literally have a tidal wave moving down through the Great Smoky Mountains, which would be, as bad as all this is, it would just be much, much, much worse.
Well, Mayor Glenn Jacobs, we appreciate you giving us an update, putting some focus on Eastern Tennessee, which is also suffering. I think the number is 11 people have died in Tennessee from this flooding. And we wish you the best. Our prayers are with you guys. And if there's anything at all we can do, or, let me know, and I'll let our listeners know. Thank you.
Right now, just send bottled water. And so many people have reached out. I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Robbie Starbuck over in Nashville, who's just been doing tremendous work on social media. He's gotten Starlink units over, literally just dropping supplies from his followers on social media, and if nothing else, that gives people just a great sense of hope. So thank you to everybody who's helped, and it has been enormous.
That's great. All right, Mayor Glenn Jacob, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. By the way, Nellie M on YouTube says FEMA does not have the funds to make it through the season. The Biden-Harris FEMA spent over $1 billion on funding illegal aliens. It reports that, as the mayor pointed out, Alejandro Mayorkas is saying that FEMA doesn't have enough money, but FEMA spent, I don't know if it's $1 billion. I saw a figure in the 700 million range on resettling illegal immigrants coming into this country. And as the mayor of Knox County points out, how many untold trillions headed to places like Ukraine. There are those that make the argument, like the one-time debate opponent we had on the show, Destiny, that it's not an either or, that we have enough money to do everything. We can fund Ukraine and we can take care of Americans. Well, if that's the case, somebody should notify Alejandro Mayorkas. Somebody should notify the people in Tennessee and North Carolina. 6 things that caught my attention, including a mini rabbit hole of the Carrington effect. Coming up on The Will Cain Show.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
Hey there, it's me, Kennedy. Make sure to check out my podcast, Kennedy Saves the World. It is 5 days a week. Every week, we check in with Jimmy Fallon, bring in authors for the book club, and even treat some of your favorite Fox personalities to a very special happy hour. Download and listen at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.
Kennedy Saves the World. America's listening to Fox News.
Streaming now, a Fox Nation exclusive.
Why can't they protect that guy?
Jesse Waters investigates both assassination attempts on Donald Trump.
He had a range fight.
Every one of the senior leadership should be held accountable.
A second assassination attempt.
We're compiling the subject's movements leading up to September 15th.
You haven't heard the full story like this.
Jesse Waters investigates the attempted assassinations of Donald Trump. Streaming now only on Fox Nation. Sign up at foxnation.com.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network.
I'm Janice Dean, Fox News senior meteorologist, and my podcast, The Janice Dean Podcast. Every week, I'll be focusing in on a person, a place, or a thing that deserves your attention because it makes the world a better place. Be sure to subscribe to The Janice Dean Podcast at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget to spread the sunshine.
America's listening to Fox News.
If North Carolina or Tennessee identified as Ukraine, then they might get some help from the government. from the comments section of The Will Cain Show. It is The Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com. On the Fox News YouTube channel and the Fox News Facebook page. Hit subscribe at Apple or Spotify. Listen to us whenever you like. Hit subscribe on YouTube and join us. Join the Willisha. As I mentioned, I socialized last night, got to have some conversations, school parents, and I will tell you, I don't know that it was a unanimous conversation. I don't know if it was ubiquitous. I don't know if everybody said it, but it seems like everybody that had something to say was incredibly complimentary of Vice Presidential candidate J.D. Vance. It was less about Tim Walz and more just about, wow, really blown away by J.D. Vance, as was I. And I shared that with you yesterday. But I always try to approach the analysis of a debate, or even, I'm not sure we're even talking about a debate. I think we're at some point talking about the way you're read, the way you're perceived, the way you come off. I try to have some humility because obviously I understand that, 350 million eyes don't see the way, or 700 million eyes, 2 for each, don't see it the way that I see it through my 2 eyes. And so we ran through some polling yesterday in the media, some focus groups on how it played, Vance versus Walz. For example, Frank Luntz, who often does focus groups, showed us that 12 out of 14 members of his focus group thought it was a win for J.D. Vance. But this morning, over at foxnews.com, they had some dial testing that showed J.D. Vance and Tim Walz through a variety of questions. Those questions included conversations about abortion, but not just abortion, about also issues that would play to Vance, like immigration. And concerningly, a lot of the dial testing showed independents tracking with Democrats. Now, here's why I think that's important. A lot of the same people last night who were like, J.D. Vance won, said after the Trump-Harris debate, Trump lost. Now, I'm not sure that played out the way that everyone thought so, or at least to the extent everyone thought in the days after the Donald Trump-Kamala Harris debate. But those very same people, and I put myself in that group who thought Donald Trump lost, thought J.D. Vance won. And I thought, oh, I need to be careful. Because in those days after that debate, dial testing said, no, independents were with Donald Trump, especially when he talked about the number one issue concerning Americans, the economy. And in opposite, when it came to J.D. Vance, independents tracked with Tim Walz. There are like 10 clips with 10 different moments from that debate up at foxnews.com. Here is one that I will show you. We'll keep my microphone up and I'll try to explain for those listening on radio or on podcast exactly what's happening in the dial testing.
I got a 17-year-old and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead.
Independents are tracking
and they were
with
asking us to do something.
Democrats.
And look, I'm a hunter.
The gulf isn't wide on this particular
firearms.
question.
The vice president is.
But they're almost in
lockstep.
lockstep.
That the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. This is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue.
All right,
she knows that it's there.
Take it down there.
No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but
what we're
ask
seeing
all of you out there.
On this is the yellow line of dial testing represents independents, the blue line represents Democrats, and the red line represents Republicans. I just used this one as an example. I don't know if that clip included, if we'd gone further 2 days, J.D. Vance's response where he says, Tim, I'm so sorry to hear that your son witnessed that shooting. But the point of what we just showed you on the screen is it kind of held true no matter the issue. It kind of held true whether or not they were talking about abortion or immigration, that the yellow line tracked the blue line, that independents tracked Democrats. And it just made me wonder, including myself, if the same people that thought Donald Trump lost thought J.D. Vance won, could we be off twice? Now, I will tell you part of the conversation as well last night was wow, this guy's so good, J.D. Vance is so good, that he is now vaulted himself for 2028. And maybe he's in the same category as Glenn Youngkin, and maybe he is the inheritor of the mantle of the future of Republicanism. Well, I would say I think that's all true. I think those are two great names. But I ran across this clip. Congressman Byron Donalds is in the Will Cain Show, Friends of the Will Cain Show Fantasy Football League. Boys in New York. He's doing really well, right? Like, what is Byron Donalds in the Fantasy Football League? He's like 3-1. And I think he's like top third of the league.
He's a certified ball knower.
I think I took him down last week, though.
Let's see.
2 days. You're not good.
I'm not good.
James and Patrick are good.
No, I just noticed this. 2 days. You're like 2-2, and you're like you look respectable at first glance in the standings. Mm-hmm. Your point total, it's awful. Yeah. You're like one of the worst in the league. You're worse than me.
Well, it's a good thing I'm a 3-time winner in my other league. So just saying.
That's what the only thing people love hearing. Yeah. The only thing people love hearing more than fantasy football talk is my other league fantasy football talk.
You cheating on us? I got it here.
I'll go away now.
All right, so I came across this despite his ball knowledge, or maybe as an illustration of his ball knowledge. Byron Donalds went on The Breakfast Club. The Breakfast Club is a very, very popular morning radio show in New York City. It's urban talk. It's urban radio. You know that urban is a euphemism for black. We all know that. Rap. And it's hosted by Charlamagne the God. I can't remember the names of the other two hosts, but I know that Angela Rye, strategist for Democrats, was on the show. I don't think she's a regular host. I think she, like Byron Donalds, was a guest, and they started talking about politics. And they started talking about inflation. I want you to listen to Byron Donalds.
I would argue we're not really thriving right now. This inflation, which, by the way, was brought to us by Kamala Harris, has really slowed down people from being able to excel.
By Kamala?
Yes.
The vice president.
Oh, Charlamagne.
It's still the president.
Charlamagne, listen, man. When Joe Biden wanted to do his American Rescue Plan, Kamala Harris was the tie-breaking vote in the United States Senate. She broke the tie that started this inflation that has hurt so many people in our country. Everybody listening to your show. It's not true?
First of all,
you sure you want to go there?
Tie-breaking vote.
You sure you want to go there?
All right, so there's Byron Donalds. So first observation is, I ask you listening. I'm going to ask you guys in New York as well. Am I being a hypocrite? Because first of all, what I appreciate about Byron Donalds, and I know about the congressman, and I know that the congressman loves sports, and I know that he loves First Take. And when we first met, that's immediately what he wanted to talk about. And I know as well he's a fan, like me, of the Dallas Cowboys. And so, I don't know any better way to say this than that Donalds is a dude.
Yeah.
All right. And I've talked about this there are guys who are dudes, and there are guys who are not dudes. And I don't care if you're black. I don't care if you're white. I don't care if you're Asian. That is a divide that you can apply to any group of people, any group of men. You're a dude or you're not a dude. And it doesn't surprise me that Byron Donalds can drop into that environment and be who he is, which is a dude. But here's why I ask you if I'm being hypocritical. He's doing code switching a little bit. Like he is meeting the audience and the host where they are, right? He calls Charlamagne man, right? Which is an informality, and it's and when you call somebody man, you're actually connecting with them, right? Every guy knows that.
He called you
when you
man.
say, "Come on, man," or what? Donald's called me man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we connect, but that's a thing. So here's my question for you. So your point may be, James, he doesn't code switch. He's kind of that same dude, whether or not he's talking to Will Cain or Charlamagne the God. I feel like he's authentic. But if Kamala Harris drops into that environment and starts changing up her accent, I feel like it's inauthentic. So am I being hypocritical, or is Donalds consistent in being that same dude no matter where he's talking?
I think his changing of tone is more like, hey, how am I going to talk when I'm with my buddies on the couch versus how am I going to talk when I'm in a meeting with Kevin McCarthy? And that's a little more, I think we relate to that a little more as opposed to I don't know. I'll be honest. I sometimes have a little more of a Southern accent when I'm around more Southern people
sometimes
that I went to school with. And it just comes out.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It happens. And he
does that with
I'll get called out for it. It's inauthentic, but
2 days he does that around me?
No, I do, I think. Sometimes I catch myself kind of having a little like Texas in my when I'm talking just because I'm like listening to you talk all the time. But I think the same thing with Byron.
Well, my accent is fluid. People have said, like, half the time I hear, why don't you have an accent? Other times I hear, why do you have a big accent? But I actually think James is onto something. I'll put this to you two days. But, like, I think that what Donalds is doing is not trying to fake a connection with a group of people he doesn't have a connection authentically. He is formal and informal, and we all do that. And when you're in a formal environment, you talk kind of a certain way. And when you're in an informal environment, and by the way, I try to make this an informal environment. You know, the Will Cain Show is informal. So if he calls me man, great. But I think he's doing something that we can all identify with, which is, all right, the Breakfast Club, pretty informal. So let me take it to him the way that I would if I was sitting on the couch with my friends.
No, it's true. Especially a radio environment like that. I think that's just how Donalds is. Like, just talking to him off air, too. He's just kind of like that. And I think some people come on our show and don't get it as much, and some people do. They see that relaxed environment. And some people, like, you could break down people's walls pretty good.
Some of my guests.
Guests, exactly. And like Dan Patrick used to do that, my old boss used to do that. You could break down somebody and get someone to kind of like go into who they actually are instead of having that kind of like wall up and that barrier a little too formal. But I think Donald is like that.
I'll be real. It's one of my goals, and it's maybe even a subconscious goal when I talk to somebody, because I'm just striving for authenticity. Like, who are you really? Like, let's just kind of. I hate the canned talking point feel of a conversation. I'd walk away, at a bar. I'd walk away if that's the way that somebody was talking to me. So back to Donalds in the Breakfast Club. Then they got into substance, and I just think this shows. First of all, I think he shows so much talent in connecting with people where they are, and then such a mastery of the issues. Here he is, continued on the Breakfast Club.
Larry Summers wrote an op-ed back in 2021. Larry Summers was the Treasury Secretary for Bill Clinton. He was an economic advisor to Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. He said that the American Rescue Plan that Joe Biden wanted, that Kamala Harris was the tie-breaking vote in the United States Senate, would create a massive inflation that we have not seen in a generation. Well, guess what? Larry Summers was correct. You know who also was correct, Angela? I was, because I was in the Budget Committee when they brought the bill. And I said in that committee, it's going to cause massive inflation. That's what happened. So the problem we have in our economy today is that prices have gone up massively. Wages adjusted for inflation is down. People's pocketbooks are hurting.
All right, there he is, just pulling receipts. Literally, he pulled receipts out of his jacket pocket, handed them to Charlemagne on Angela Rye. I just think it's masterful. But here's what let me tie now this all together. I'd be curious how he dial tested in that. And I think that me and the guys here in New York, I think we might be stumbling on to, if there is a shortcoming for J.D. Vance, what that might be. So I was trying to consider, guys, like, why would independents track Democrats? Okay, obviously you have to first address, is it the issues? Like, is it literally the things coming out of his mouth? I'm a little skeptical that that's what it is, okay? Because as I've explained on the show, it rarely is about what you're saying. And like 5 to 10% is about the words coming out of your mouth. 80% how you look and another 20% how you sound. So I worry. First I thought, well, is Vance too polished? Like, if all the people who are, wrong about Donald Trump, like J.D. Vance, are they not appreciating the chaotic, polished nature of Donald Trump, and they're over-indexing? Oh, here's a guy who really does this in a really smart, polished way. And are they not in touch then with something that people actually want? But then I thought, I don't know, like, polish isn't bad. I think you might be onto it 2 days when you said it. That sense of a wall. When I'm listening to Donalds, I think I'm listening to Donalds. Like, that is who he is, always. And I can appreciate that feeling regardless of the words coming out of his mouth. You certainly would have to feel that way with Donald Trump. You may hate it, but you would probably also say, man, there's no wall and there's no filter with Donald Trump. And I wonder if J.D., despite his polish, despite his intellect, despite his really objectively good ability to debate, has a wall that is keeping people from connecting to him, specifically independents. Tinfoil, I saw you had something. What's up?
So I was just thinking about this as far as like other Democrat politicians. And Ocasio-Cortez, I think, can get away with it because she's a theater kid. And so performance is something natural for her. Whereas like Hillary Clinton,
but
we know she is fake.
Performance, okay, so maybe you're saying this, but performance is tricky. You know, I have a buddy who's been on this show who's a trial lawyer, and he's a really good trial lawyer. And he talks about the best, like one of the best to ever do trial law is Jerry Spence. I don't expect James to know who that is. He's way too young. You guys are all probably too young. Jerry Spence is a famous trial lawyer. He wore like a leather jacket with the what is it? It's not, you call it tassels? The strings coming off Western style. So. He's like a Wyoming guy. He helped pioneer this idea. You have to connect with the jury emotionally. Like you have to. And if you do, you'll slaughter the guy who's sitting out there, you know, trying to rely on the foundation of the supposed facts. But this is what my friend tells me. Imitators are awful. If you're not good at the performance, it's a huge turnoff. It's really bad. So my key, look, behind the curtain here. Like, I try not to perform. That's honestly what I watched Mr. McMahon on Netflix. It's like a 6-part documentary series. I'm fascinated by it, man. I'm fascinated by WWE. I really am. And Tinfoil Pat's been part of, like, pushing me in this direction, and our friend Bobby Burek at Outkick. Like, life is WWE. It really is. And in so many ways, it's such a good little, stage on which we play humanity out in simplistic terms. And they talk about it in there, you just have to connect emotionally, and all you want is heat, and it doesn't matter if it's love or hate. It doesn't matter. You want them to feel. I don't remember exactly why I brought up WWE, but
the McMahon performance.
Heels and baby faces.
I know, and I know they said in the documentary that Vince McMahon, is he Vince in real life or is he Mr. McMahon, the character, right? And somebody said something smart. They go, Mr. McMahon is Vince dialed up to 20, on a 10-point scale. Like, there's always an element of truth, but you turn up. And I would tell you, like, people say to me, Stephen A., is that really how he is? I don't think he's performing to the level of being fake, but he's turning himself up to 20. So my thing is, I've tried first of all, I try never to be fake. And if I'm turning myself up, involuntarily, I try to keep it to a minimum. My goal is to be real because I want to connect. That's my currency, connecting with people. I like it. I enjoy it. I don't like feeling like I'm getting a version of someone so that they get something from me, whether I'm in the audience or I'm in this side of the microphone. And I guess what I'm trying to tie this all together to is, therefore, Donalds connects with me when I see that because I feel like that's him. And I'm wondering about that for Vance. Is that the problem? To your point, Tude, is it the wall?
Well, there's a fine line with a politician being too relatable, but you want someone that is smarter than you just a little bit, right? Or knows a little bit more than you. So it's a fine line they have to walk with, stumbling over words or saying something wrong. If you're dial testing in that moment, that's what you're looking at. You want something relatable, but you want someone that just kind of just has that little extra that you're like, hey.
Intelligence is not a connector. Yeah. Brene Brown's a famous writer. She's on the left. And she said this, and I always remember it. Vulnerability is the key to human connection. People connect through their fallibility. Oh, yeah. And, in intellect, which seems to be JD's primary currency, intellect is not something people connect with. They just do not. And I know this. ESPN tried this over and over. Like, look, Pablo Torre and Bomani Jones, really smart guys. Show didn't work because people aren't there for, like, smart. They are there for other reasons. And if you give them smart, that's added value. And I think it works the same way in politics. You can't sell people smart. Smart is often a turnoff, right? That doesn't mean we don't appreciate smart. It just means it can't be that's not the way you break through the wall. That can't be how you walk through the front door. It's not the way you try to connect to people. I'm just thinking out loud on all of this because I'm fascinated by the way people respond to other people and are responding to J.D. Vance.
James had a good idea.
I think there's a rabbit hole we can go down with here too. We should have dial testing for when you're talking to a new girl at a bar and see like how you're doing because like there is a certain like it has nothing to do with what you're saying.
It's a great idea.
It's how you present. You could be speaking gibberish and
all of a sudden you just see the lines as you're talking.
But it could
like,
be going
boom.
up just because your presentation and your body language and your smiles
Okay,
working.
so Mark Zuckerberg said by like 2030 the phone will be gone. I just saw this the other day that you'll be wearing glasses.
Oh my God!
Which if you're wearing glasses. Yeah, if you're wearing glasses, how long till you're wearing contacts, right? So you've got your contacts in, you're hitting on a girl at the bar, right? And you start seeing your dial testing come in.
You're like, shit, I'm out.
And yeah, I mean, you are going to look like Tim Waltz. You're going to be flip-flop. You'll be nervous. You're going to be stop-starting. You're going to be all over the place. But here's the other aspect of that. A lady, therefore, never has to figure out how to softly let you down. She can just slowly turn down her dial, however we do at that point, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, is that like on her phone? And you're talking to her, and you see your line going down, you're like, oh my God, she's putting this in as we speak.
Or having an argument with like your wife or something, you dial test the argument. You're like, all right, I'm not winning this. I'm not winning this.
You'll never be up.
I mean, I would be up for it on this show. Like, that's why I love bringing the comment section in, hearing from you guys. I like knowing what resonates, what connects, where your thoughts are. We should just put a dial test up here on the Will Cain Show. But even that, like, just think about how that would destroy your confidence. What if J.D. and Tim, what if J.D. and Tim Waltz could see that in real time during the debate? Like, you'd be a puddle.
Yeah.
You have to ignore it.
I think when you're
have to ignore it.
I think when you're at a bar, you could tell when your dial's up and your dial's down.
At least
like, I think you're right.
You think that.
Good point. Sometimes
some guys,
a lot of times
some guys can't,
up.
James.
Yeah.
Yeah, some guys can't. Some guys have no dial testing whatsoever. Speaking of no dial testing, how about your chief union negotiator for the port strike? Reports coming out now, he just sold a 74-foot yacht. Elon Musk tweeted, this guy has more yachts than I do. He makes close to $1 million a year, the guy negotiating the port closures that have now threatened, scarcity in bananas and everything else, like a huge amount. This is a big deal. And he's so brazen. He's so brazen. I will cripple America. Remember that? By the way, I think we have that. We had trouble with it yesterday, but I wanted it yesterday. I didn't have it. I didn't want it today, but 2 days delivers. Here's the port's chief negotiator.
They're going to be like this. Who's going to win here in the long run? You're better off sitting down and let's get a contract and let's move on with this world. And in today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you, and you have no idea what that means. Nobody does.
I swear that guy is straight out of Sopranos. And we have this now. I believe this is from the New York Post. This is his home. He has a home. I don't know how many square feet that is. What would you guys guess? 7,000?
Yeah, that's
8,000 square foot
that's
home?
That's probably like in the 6,500
It is 7,000,
range.
yeah. I looked it up.
It is 7,000? Is that what it says? Yeah. I mean, he's got a giant swimming pool. He's got an outdoor bar. He's got a 5-car garage. Oh, look at this. He has a whole building that's an outdoor sauna. Wow. A skyway. Look at this. He has a skyway to the garage, so he pulls his cars under the skyway and into his 5-car garage. He has a Bentley. He's got a Bentley convertible. This dude living large, doing whatever he's doing for America's ports. I've seen some reporting that he's also in the past negotiated or suggested that we should have toll booths with toll booth change takers, right? Because those are union jobs. You put union guys out of business. You just, instead of the easy pass, right? No easy passes. Got to go backwards. That's the thing about you. You got to figure out how to not save American jobs, but create American jobs. Because you can't bring back yesterday. You can only be there tomorrow for Americans. All right, I put this in the headline today, and I think it's an absolutely fascinating moment. Ari Melber of MSNBC has a panel. On this panel, It includes Peter Navarro, formerly of the Trump administration. He's silent in this clip. So if you're listening on radio or on podcast, I'll tell you his facial expressions. If you're watching, watch Peter Navarro. But he's not the one being questioned by Ari Melber. It's a guy who was a witness against Donald Trump when it comes to January 6th and said that the threat to democracy of Donald Trump in the past is the greatest threat to America. That's not what happened this time on MSNBC. Watch.
Why was it important for you to say no more Trump because of his January 6th conduct, and do you stand by that?
No, I don't stand by it, and I'll tell you why. I've now lived 4 years under the Biden-Harris policies, and I have to say that those policies are not only becoming an existential threat to our country's way of life, but to our allies as well.
So when you I'll let you finish, but this is so striking. You said it was a no for me after that, after January 6th. I did. And here we are right now. I did. And you're saying it's a yes for you.
It is a yes for me. It is an absolute yes for me. That is how badly the Biden-Harris team have prosecuted their job.
But the whole point you seem to be making was that January 6th and that kind of attack on democracy is bigger than any policy difference.
I am seeing so many attacks on democracy that eclipse January 6th.
Did not see that coming. It's I think, very, very valid substantive argument. What's a greater threat to democracy? What's a greater existential threat to America? The continued decline under the weight of sometimes corrupt and often socialistic and would-be communist policies to drive America into the same experiment as the rest of humanity. We're the great exception on the face of the earth, both over time and in geography, meaning I give you history and I give you the world. We are the great exception. We are the defender of liberty, of individual rights of man. And the threat to that, of us just becoming like everybody else, under the hubris and lack of humility of a group of people that think they can engineer a better world, despite the failures of the attempts to do so in other places, threatens the greatest experiment in human history. I agree with this guy, Ari Melber, taken a little bit aback that it's not all about January 6th. Stepping aside my own personal feelings, this is my attempt at just objective analysis. I don't think January 6th is the motivating voting issue for a lot of people in America. I think it is for those already with Kamala Harris and already with Tim Walz. I do not think it is for independents. While we're talking about mainstream media, I want to show you CNN has a headline up about the October surprises that are coming in succession, including the three that we've just experienced the last couple of days. Port strike, awful hurricane, and devastation in America, and advent, potentially, doorstep of a war in the Middle East. And this is the way it's styled on CNN. Events threaten to conspire against Harris. What passive voice. What a victim of circumstance. Events threaten to conspire against Harris. Well, I have to break some news to CNN breaking news. This is the job of president. And by extension, vice president. Kamala Harris is the sitting vice president of the United States. We elect someone for how they respond to events. We elect someone who we hope has good judgment in circumstances. George Bush wants to be the education president. He ends up being the guy who has to deal with 9/11. You elect leaders, wisdom, good judgment, and the ability to lead through, quote unquote, events. Finally, on the things that caught my attention today, this tweet from a guy who respects, I don't think we've had him yet on the Will Cain Show, but Brett Weinstein, he's a professor. I believe he's in the Pacific Northwest. He's a frequent guest on Joe Rogan. He tweeted out the following. He tweeted out, heads up, folks. This is a potentially very serious situation. A huge solar flare erupted on the sun at 5:22 a.m. Pacific time. It's the largest flare in this 11-year cycle. It did produce a coronal mass ejection plasma burst. It came from a sunspot cluster that is directly facing Earth. All those factors are bad for us, but there are other things we need to know. And he says, stay tuned to Sun Weatherman. Sun Weatherman is a guy, I guess, who reports on this kind of stuff. And he says then, first blast to arrive tomorrow night. The second, bigger one, will hit this weekend. The update, in case you're now worried about the end of the world, is Sun Weatherman says satellite data is not terribly concerned about the CMA from this giant flare. So that got me wondering, because it came up in the comments section and with one of my producers, what the hell are they talking about? It got me wondering, sun flares? I listened to a podcast once called, I think it was called The End of the World. I loved it. It was like 10-part series on all the things that could be existential threats to the world. And like this guy goes through everything, like aliens, like a meteor, like climate change. He talks about all of them, like, and tells you, are they, probability-wise and where we are and what we know about the world and the universe, are they real threats? Just as an example, climate change is not, by any scientist's estimation, an existential threat to humanity. It's just not. Existential threat to humanity means in the human race. He does talk about in that podcast, the sun, like whatever the sun, I guess, maybe does this. Like, what does it mean to us? So I started looking at, like, okay, we're talking about a geomagnetic storm. That's what is a coronal mass ejection. That almost sounds like inappropriate for mass media. Coronal mass ejection. I think you got to be careful where you say that. Probably best to just say it around scientists. But it's plasma, solar wind, and it can come to Earth. And you're like, okay, come on. Like, what's the point of this? But it's happened. And that's my mini rabbit hole for the day. The Carrington event. September 1st, 1859. A geomagnetic storm was associated with a very bright solar flare. It was observed and recorded by two British astronomers, Richard Carrington and Richard Hodgson. It's the first recorded solar flare. Of course, there's more, but first recorded. And what happened? Gold miners in Colorado were woken up in the middle of the night from huge auroras. All across Earth, you could see these huge auroras, aurora borealis. It lit up. The telegraph systems went down, blacked out. Geomagnetically induced current from the electromagnetic field failed telegraph systems all over Europe and North America. And back then, that's really all they were dealing with, to the extent that they had electricity out. And so it's happened. It's happened. If you go to Wikipedia, you can see there's been solar storms in 1921, 38, 41, 58, 59, 60. Smaller ones at other times as well. But a Carrington effect, solar flare, Carrington event, solar flare. I don't know, just something to put on your radar. Maybe even this weekend. We don't want to traffic in hysteria, but it might be interesting and just something worth knowing as we fall just a little bit down into the rabbit hole. All right, across the country, let's check in with voters in those swing states through our friend, David Marcus, next on The Will Cain Show.
It is time to take the quiz.
5 days a week, it's 5 questions in less than 5 minutes. We ask people on the streets of New York City to play along. Let's see how you do.
Including the pre-Super Bowl era, what NFL franchise has won the most NFL championships?
I'm going to say the Cowboys.
Good guess. I would say the Packers.
How'd you do? Exactly. These get tougher, so hang on.
Make sure you take the quiz every weekday at thequiz.fox. Thank you for taking the quiz.
We're bringing forecasting grit to the gridiron. Fox Weather is storming the field with the risk of weather impact on the hottest NFL matchups all season long, delivering unmatched insight from the leader in weather news and how the forecast could affect your favorite players. We are taking you right into the end zone with Fox Weather's exclusive weather forecasting technology and the risk of weather impact for every single game of the regular season. Listen to Storming the Field every Friday on FoxNewsPodcasts.com. The world of business moves fast. Stay on top of it with the Fox Business Rundown. Every Monday and Friday, Fox Business reporters, anchors, and hosts will bring you beneath the stock market speculation and boardroom drama to tell you about the biggest business stories of today. Whether you're on Main Street or Wall Street, Fox Business is invested in you. Listen to the Fox Business Rundown every Monday and Friday at FoxBusinessPodcasts.com, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your favorite podcasts.
Let's connect with Americans. the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel, on the Fox News Facebook page. Subscribe, YouTube. Subscribe, Spotify. Subscribe, Apple. David Marcus is a columnist at Fox News. He's the author of Charade, The COVID Lies That Crushed a Nation. He's also been traveling across the country, talking to voters, going to bars, going to restaurants, talking to the people. Last week we had David on. He talked about some of the conversations he's had in places like Pennsylvania. I understand this week, David, you spent some time in Maryland.
Yeah, how you doing? Well, it's good to talk to you. I mean, this might be pointless given the solar flares, but, it's always nice to chat anyway. Yeah, so I've spent a little bit of time in Maryland. Maryland's obviously not a presidential swing state, but there is a competitive Senate race. Former Republican Governor Larry Hogan against the Democrat Angela Brooks. It's interesting because Hogan has not endorsed Trump. Trump has endorsed Hogan. There's also a couple of competitive House races, including Kimberly Klacik, who I think some of your viewers and listeners might remember from sort of walking around Baltimore in high heels trying to get, people to register Republican. Her district now includes Carroll County, which is a farming community. I took my son to the county fair there. It's like the giant combines that look like dinosaurs and stuff. It leans red, which is rare for Baltimore. And it is at the heart of a major controversy there that I think most Americans aren't aware of, which is called, it's a project called the Piedmont Reliability Project. And basically, the Democrat government of Maryland wants to run hundreds of miles of power lines right across the farms, right across Maryland into Virginia, and they want to use eminent domain to tell the farmers who don't want it that they have to. So the farmers are outraged. They're organizing. They absolutely are going to plan to vote. And I think that's something to keep an eye on because in a non-swing state, you have a lot of people who don't vote. They just say, it doesn't matter. Now, I hear that a lot. I think it's wrong, and there's reasons why it's wrong. But this Piedmont Reliability Project is firing Republicans up in the state, and I really think it can help Hogan and Klacik a lot.
Wow. That's not a state, to your point, that we pay attention to often.
Yeah, it's one of these little things that you find when you go around where it's like, it's never going to be national news. But listen, this could flip the Senate, right? And you've got Kamala Harris saying she's ready to get rid of the filibuster. So, it really gets that granular, right? If Hogan can pull that off, we're a lot safer as far as keeping the filibuster than if also Brooks gets in there and just becomes another sort of Democrat rubber stamp. So these are the kinds of issues that are important to local places, but also can really have a huge national impact.
I want to talk to you about two local places. First, let's talk about, I believe you traveled at some point during your travels with Charlie John Steinbeck, cataloging where American voters are experience. I think you traveled to Arizona. And I'm curious, did you make it to Arizona, David?
I didn't. I made it to California.
You went to California.
I went to San Francisco.
What I wanted to ask about is, I had a conversation this week with the guy talking about the Senate, to your point, who said, when we look at swing states and we look at states where there's a race for the Senate, a lot of people have written off Arizona and said Kari Lake's not going to win. I had a conversation with a guy in the know this week that said that's not true. There is some very interesting polling internals that Kari Lake has a real chance to win Arizona. Everybody's looking at Tim Sheehy in Montana. That's one that Republicans hope to pick up to swing the Senate. You just brought up Maryland. But not many people, some have brought up Nevada, Sam Brown, war vet.
Justice will win West Virginia.
It seems like, and Justice in West Virginia. You were in California, so you didn't get to talk to people in Arizona. I just wonder if you think there's anything to that. There's more, maybe even Arizona.
Maybe. I mean, I'm fairly skeptical of polling, so I always think that, sort of anything could happen. I remember, and it's interesting that you're hearing that from people on the ground, because I remember in 22, in like June or July, I started hearing a buzz in like the bagel places and stuff in New York about Lee Zeldin. And I was saying to all my editors, like, I'm hearing some stuff on the ground here. And they're like, come on, Dave, it's a 35-point race. We can't waste any ink on that. And we're like, all right. A month later, it's shrinking. He almost won that race. So it's certainly possible that Lake could do that. Lake is a very sort of like electric personality. I don't know if you've spent any time with her, but I remember being in the green room at CPAC, and she walked in and sort of owned the room. So look, she's swimming against the stream, and I don't know how good her sort of ground operation is. But yeah, I mean, she's got a shot. Arizona is so strange though, because you have cinema, you have like the legacy of McCain, and the McCain legacy is not particularly enamored of Lake. So there's a lot of moving parts there.
All right, you live in West Virginia, and I know it's not exactly next door to what's just happened tragically in North Carolina and Tennessee and South Carolina. And I don't want to turn a tragedy into politics. By the way, on that note, I'm so grossed out by that. And I had to tweet about it yesterday because some hack lefty who I'd never heard of, but I guess he kind of does this kind of stuff, had pointed out Donald Trump's GoFundMe and said that Donald Trump had raised $3.5 million and only 3% was going to go to the hurricane, the hurricane victims, flood victims. And immediately I saw that and I was like, that doesn't sound right to me. I've done a lot of work with GoFundMe. They were our facilitator in Maui. They take 3%. That's what GoFundMe does. They take a 3% processing fee. I was like, that's just too cute that he could have flipped that. And so I called GoFundMe. I mean, I called the senior director of public affairs, and they said, categorically 100% false. That's just fake nonsense by a hack on the internet. And by the way, I think what I'm kind of saying is there's those on the right who have trafficked in sort of disaster porn as an indictment of politicians. That doesn't mean they don't deserve it, but you got to take a breath because you got to figure out what's going on. I mean, this is horrific stuff that's going on. And I think there's just too many people that traffic in this for cheap political points. So I'm sensitive that I'm even thinking this way with you, but like CNN wrote it up. October surprises, 3 of them: Middle East, port strike, and this disaster. Like, what do you think those people in the Appalachians, and by the way, West Virginia's in the northern Appalachians or mid-Appalachians, what do you think they're thinking right now?
One of the things that I hear a lot, and it's also reflected on social media, but in this case, I hear it from actual people as well, that's not always true. In this case, it is. There's anger about this in regard to the immigration issue, and to a lesser degree in regard to Ukraine. But and the idea that we're spending money on all of these things. So, for example, you had Harris go down yesterday and say we're going to give everybody $750, right? In New York, you have programs where illegal immigrants are getting debit cards that get $350 on them every week. And I think that when Americans anywhere, but especially in the quote unquote flyover country, see that, it infuriates them, and they don't think it's reasonable. Yeah, and it should. And look, I don't even know that that's politics, right? I mean, at a certain point, you have to be able to just sort of say, this is fundamentally unfair and wrong, and it's about the thing itself, right? In German philosophy, there's a thing called Ding an sich, which means the thing in itself. Having nothing to do with politics. This is just a problem that we have all this money for people in the country illegally, and $750 for people whose homes have been destroyed.
Yes, this is to me, and we can always debate the application of this in policy, but this is, to me, to use your fancy German philosophy, which I've never heard of, but this is the heart of the issue when it comes to America first. Like, it's just, I mean, don't sell me on we can do everything. We have enough money to send to Ukraine. If you're telling me FEMA's is broke and can't make it through the hurricane season, don't sell me on your empathy of bringing the world's migrants to America and showering them. I'm not stupid. I don't think they're getting rich, but I think they're getting more than somebody who just lost their home right now in North Carolina. And that is like the antithesis of America first.
Yeah.
Like, that's what, it's our government. We pay the taxes. We elect the politicians. It's like, it's not jingoistic. It should be America first.
Yeah, and look, I think that you're right that the immigrants aren't getting rich, but I mean, they are in many cases compared to where they came from, right? And that's the magnet.
Yeah.
That's the magnet. You know, it's not 1882 anymore. They can jump on their cell phone and say, "Hey guys, look at this." Yeah, that's what happened in New York, right? That whole busing of the migrant thing started as a troll, if you recall, right? It was like, we're going to troll New York, and eventually DeSantis did it with Martha's Vineyard. That was really meant first and foremost as a PR move to point out the hypocrisy that was going on. What it quickly turned into was a full-blown crisis, because those people were getting there and they were like, wow, this is a lot more stuff that I'm getting in Texas. This is a lot more stuff that I'm getting in Florida. It's pretty good.
Yeah. I saw Greg Abbott say he wasn't sending people to New York until Eric Adams started blaming him for sending people to New York. And he's like, well, I might as well. If he's going to go ahead and do this, then we might as well start the program.
And Adams,
David Marcus.
Yeah, I mean, Adams had the guts to stand up to it, and now he's in a lot of trouble. And I don't know if there's a connection there or the timing or what it is, but yeah, what a mess.
I know. I've thought about that, David, and I've looked into it some, but I've also heard there's more to come. And it's pretty
New York City.
Not good for Eric Adams. Yeah, it's New York City. All right, David Marcus across the country joining us here as we head into the election on where Americans are, what they are thinking as he talks to them face to face. Thanks so much, David.
Thanks, Will. Have a good one.
All right, check out David's stuff at foxnews.com. He writes columns and filings from across the country heading into the election. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Kane on Sports Edition. Tomorrow, Craig Carton of FS1 is going to join us. I will see you again next time.